And welcome to Life.Examined. We are now in Joshua's attic recording. Finally, it's a great place to be. So Life.Examined is a philosophical practice collective. And what we do is we make philosophy out of everything in life, everything that we go through. Philosophy for the non-academics and the academics. But anyway, the idea is that we are really homo philosophicus. We are philosophical beings, and we need this, and that's what we want to do here today. And every time we meet, really, we bring up a subject, and then we discuss it, and allow the thought to take us somewhere where we didn't know we were going. Yes.
Yes, and today we're indoors, and there's a little bit of ambiance noise. You might hear some of the rain falling on us because it is pouring rain here in Gothenburg today. So we're indoors. I'm Matthew Nowachek from Lund, and I'm going to explain a little bit the idea of today. What we do with these talks, usually we have it over Skype, but today we're all together, is we have one of us bring a topic and we explore the topic together. Miriam and I don't really have any idea what Josh has brought today. We've got a title and that's it. So Josh is going to introduce the topic to us, and then all of us are together going to try to explore this, raise some questions, throw some things back and forth, have a little bit of a dialogue with one another. So Joshua, take it away, my friend.
There we go. Okay. So today the topic is about intellectual humility, or the relationship between intellectual humility and a love of truth. So two different intellectual virtues. So just to sort of set that framework, I want to make a little bit of an argument. So I have to set the background a little bit first. So first of all, virtue. What is virtue?
Yeah.
So virtue, I mean, in an Aristotelian sense, a virtue is a mean between two vices, which are the extremes. You have two extremes, and virtue is the golden mean. And there's a lot of different examples about that. But virtue is intimately tied to flourishing. So the idea is that virtue is something that is needed to be able to flourish. But to be able to flourish is to be able to do the thing which you are most suited for, you put it that way. So for Aristotle, there was a sense of eudaimonia, the sense of reaching happiness, and so flourishing was moving in that direction, being the most human you could say that you could be. So that's sort of the virtue flourishing background. And intellectual qualities then are the intellectual parts of us. We're more dynamic, we're more multifaceted than just being intellectual beings, but we have an intellectual dimension. And so intellectual virtues are when our intellectual capacities are working well according to the kinds of things that they are, that together help us toward eudaimonia, or help us toward a kind of flourishing. So they're in the context of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I jump in?
Jump in.
Okay, so I have one thing about virtue. So the way I understand virtue is also that just basically what you said, but in different words. It's a quality that is good to have.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's something that we should try to develop. And then you said something about doing the thing that you're most suited for. Yeah. This is very interesting because I both have the idea of, for instance, if someone who is very tall will be better at basketball than someone who's very, for instance. So in that way, what you're suited for. But then when it comes to all of these other less obvious qualities, it's often very good to practice what you don't do a lot, and to kind of go against your
grain or your sort of natural tendencies.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think that would work. Like and you know Aristotle better than I do, Matthew. So as far as I understand it, like there's my way of thinking of it is that there are multiple levels. So there's an overall level, like what is the purpose of your life and how does that move you forward? And there might be ones that are further down, like maybe you're a little bit afraid of heights, and so you practice at getting better at being able to handle heights. But that is all subsumed underneath the overall movement towards flourishing.
Right.
There are some qualities that we might have that you have to balance out with other qualities in order to flourish. So if you allow a fear of heights, for example, to overwhelm your other qualities, then you're not going to be flourishing.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's the end, it's the telos, it's the end that you are going towards.
And there's a function account here. I mean, we're functioning well. That's what we're shooting for. And as human beings, I mean, if we look at Aristotle's account, right? And human beings, we are rational animals. There's a biological aspect to us. There's a way to function biologically well, but we're also intellectually, there's an intellectual aspect, a rational part of human beings that is part of what it means to function well as a human being, or qua human being.
And I don't want to get too wrapped up in Aristotle in a sense, that he just sets the framework, and we could have different accounts of virtue and different accounts of that, but I think the crucial thing for what my argument's going to be is that the crucial thing is that there is some flourishing. So there's some end that we are most suited for. And intellectual characteristics or abilities are a part of that. So you might have slightly different accounts. You might take a Aristotelian account. You might take an Aquinas account of what flourishing is, right? Or what the end that we're made for is. So that could be different. But the crucial thing I want to make is a connection between two different intellectual virtues, i.e. humility and a love for truth. So I want to make a connection there and then see how those are connected towards moving us towards a kind of flourishing.
I love this now. I'm just going to have to say it. Because the thing is, I've been thinking so much lately about the self and development. And this, the way we are talking about it now, or where you were bringing it up, is there is a self. The self has many parts, some of which we're not really aware of, you know, or we don't define that easily. But one of them is intellectual in nature.
Absolutely.
There is flourishing and there is growth. So there is like a path. And for instance, if I'm afraid of heights, or if it's kind of like what I have karmically come here to deal extra with. So that is my path. The necessary conditions that James Hillman would talk about, the necessary conditions to reach your flourishing. Yes. And sorry, now back to your argument.
Okay. So we're on board. So we've got virtue, which is essential for flourishing. So then the two different intellectual virtues that I want to pick up on are humility and a love of truth. So humility is very roughly an honest recognition of oneself in the world, right? So it's an honest estimation of one's own abilities. So it's not, I think sometimes people think of humility as being a downplaying. Right? So as far as I understand humility, it's not a downplaying. It's not saying I'm worthless. That's not humility. That's self-hatred, right? Something like that.
Self-loathing, right?
And self-loathing. And that would not be a virtue. That's not a virtue. But a virtue would be to have an appropriate estimation of oneself. So if you are good at basketball, then you recognize, I'm good at basketball, but it's not then arrogance, which is an overestimation, or hubris, like we were talking about the other day. Hubris would be to overestimate your abilities, like say, I am the best basketball player in the world. But humility is to recognize where you're at. Like I'm at this level, and that's okay, right? And that's so humility is one thing. And in terms of, maybe we can flesh this out more, but just very briefly, in terms of an intellectual virtue, I think humility has to do with a recognition of one's limitations. So I understand so much about mathematics. I understand this, but I know where my limits are, right? So it's a recognizing the limits of rationality, maybe, to put it in terms of intellectual virtue. So then the next one is a love of truth, and that has to do with a desire to know the way something is, the love of truth. Like you want to know, how is it? How does it actually in the world, or with me, or whatever? And I think that these two are connected. And I think one of the bridges, this is where the interesting part of the argument comes up, which we'll see what you guys think. This is coming out of the background is out of a book called A Philosophy of Philosophy by Qasim Qassam, which is 2007, I think was published. Brilliant book. And
the philosophy of philosophy.
Philosophy of philosophy, and by Qasim Qassam. So Qasim Qassam is a brilliant UK from the UK, British scholar.
I mean, that is basically all philosophy is asking the question, what is philosophy?
Yeah. Over and
Over and over
Yeah.
again.
That's right. Yeah. So, but he talks about a kind of question, and the kind of question he's interested in are how possible questions.
Yeah.
So one kind of question is a how question. Let's say Matthew says, I know it's raining outside. And I say, oh, well, like, you might be curious. Oh, how do you know that? And he says, well, I just looked out the window and I saw that it was raining. Oh, so that's a how.
That's deduction for you.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's a how question. There's lots of how questions. And how questions are normally like trying to figure out the link between a claim and how you got there. How possible questions, however, are questions that are built into them is a something which stands in the way, an obstacle. So a good example is, how is it possible that you can say, how is it possible that we are free? Because it seems like there's an obstacle. We understand maybe something about what it is to be free, that you're able to make a choice without any constraint in some sense, or we also understand something about determinism, and so then it raises a how possible question. How is it possible that we are free? So it's a different kind of question than a how question, right? I mean, there's a different structure there. So I think the connection then, to make a connection between these two intellectual virtues, humility and a love of truth, is that they really come together with how possible questions in this way. Because there's an obstacle that has to be dealt with in a how possible question. Humility recognizes where we don't know. We don't know something. And the reason why a how possible question arises is because we don't see how they can fit together. So we think we think we understand something about what freedom is. We think we understand something about what determinism is. But we don't see how they can come together. So humility is the recognition that maybe they do fit together, but I don't see it yet. Or maybe it could be this way, right? So you can try to work out that obstacle in different ways to answer the how possible question. And then the intellectual virtue of a love for truth forces you to continue looking, right? It says either you have to say the question is wrongly framed, or the obstacle can be resolved, or right. But the love of truth pushes you to continually be saying, well, there either needs to be a resolution in one way or the other, right? You need to work it out, and the humility makes it so that you're willing to explore different ways that it might be worked out, and you're willing to say, look, this other person has a different opinion about the how possible question, and I need to listen to what they're saying, and I need to explore it, and I need to pursue the truth, right? So I think those two come together.
They do come together
through how possible questions. I think how possible questions are a good example of how those two intellectual virtues are sort of brought forward. So that's what I'm bringing.
Yes. I have something nagging in my head, and it's the word possible. And when you talked about humility, you said that it is. You said it's something like having an honest, appropriate estimation of what you do know in relation to what there is to know, and the more you know, the less you know.
And that's actually true. The more you know, the less you know, right? I mean, the more the more
horizon expands.
The horizon expands, which means your contact with the unknown expands.
Yes. It's like the thing goes, and then it just goes, woo.
And that's an aspect. I think that's an aspect of humility, right? Because there's a you know more things, but in knowing more things, you recognize that there are even more things that you don't know, right?
Yes.
But it could be a lack of humility there, right? You could know a lot of things and think like, well, I've basically got it figured out, and that doesn't seem to be very.
But the thing is, that could be honest.
It could be if you actually have figured it out.
Yes, or it could be honest if you were deluded, or if you had some psychological condition that that made you. So what I wanted to go with this was that, like, the ethical imperative for when you are working on developing your intellectual virtue of humility. you can tell yourself things like, well, in this situation, in this new situation, I will always consider the possibility, again the word possibility, the possibility that something is not the way I thought. And you can even 20 minutes later come out and say, well, it was the way I thought, but you have tried this, you made the thought experiment. I think a lot of philosophical practices thought experiments and always asking this. And if you have, for instance, someone in power making a claim that doesn't resonate with you, or you think, what? Like we're right now in Sweden, where the Swedish government is going sort of against all other Western nations.
Yeah, sure.
So, and it would be easy to say like, oh, they're crazy, they're going again. And if you do that, you have to admit that you have a kind of view that what the majority thinks is true. It's possible, but you have to check and make a thought.
Sure.
So you can create a thought experiment, like for instance. I try to do this when a person in power makes claims that I don't get immediately. I think, what do they know that I don't?
Sure. Yeah.
And then you can sort of think, what would be the most charitable
reading?
Interpretation of what they say.
And that's good. That helps me, because I realized I didn't really state the argument very clearly, and I think that helps me, because in this way, right? I think what the best way to put the argument is like this: that I want to say that humility and a love of truth are two intellectual virtues which are linked together. They support each other. There's a kind of interdependency, and we can see that interdependency when we look at how possible questions. And this is a good example of it, right? Because giving somebody a charitable reading of an argument is a kind of humility, and it's a kind of pursuit of truth. Right? It's a love of truth. Like,
so I'm wondering, like, okay, so I've got a lot of questions here. I'll start with the first one. It seems like when we talk about what we can know, questions of epistemology, underlying that are questions of what is, questions of ontology, the way things are. And so I think when you raise this argument, we're presupposing a certain account of truth, of ontology, of the way that the truth looks, that makes it possible for us then to pursue it. What is under the surface here? This is what I'm really curious about, because these are really fascinating questions for me.
So I think what's under the surface. From my perspective, right, what's under the surface is an assumption that there is a common world which we can know. So an assumption that there's an external world. If you have a total solipsism, so solipsism is just the philosophical idea that reality is completely contained by my own perspective. Then humility and a love of truth fall apart, right? So if that's your ontological or your metaphysical background, then to put it back into the perspective of flourishing and virtue, then these intellectual virtues, humility and a love of truth, are irrelevant to your flourishing. Right? But I don't think that's the case. No. So if you disagree with that, right? If you think, well, actually, we live in a solipsistic world where where everything is actually just contained within my own perspective, well, then these aren't relevant.
But then you wouldn't be like discussing with anyone else.
Well, maybe it's just a fantasy in my head, right? Like, I don't know, it's sort of this thing that goes on. Right, but I think that's an argument against solipsism. So my take would be something like, this helps us see why solipsism doesn't work, because these things are intimately connected to each other.
Because in a previous session, we've talked a little bit about the idea that we can hold to some account of truth that can be known without having a perfect method for how to get there. And that seems to be a crucial piece of what this discussion is about, that if we want to talk about having humility, there's almost a belief in some kind of truth that can be known collectively and shared, can be shared, right? Otherwise, we would be sort of off on a tangent, and like you said, humility wouldn't make any sense. It seems.
So we do believe in the world.
Yes, I do.
And the like people and the self and the human as a possible vehicle or channel for like gathering information about and making correct interpretations or something. But I agree. I do that too. But I wanted to ask humility. If we want to be really philosophical, so we ask, why is humility a virtue? Why is humility a quality that is good to have? So a way to go. Oh yeah.
Well,
How does humility help us function better as human beings?
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Thrive.
Yeah.
Function.
So, what would you say? Because why is humility a virtue? Because it helps us function as human beings.
Yeah. Well, maybe if we look at what happens if we have the vice, so the opposite of humility.
Good.
What happens if we start there? And I think it's pretty.
What would be those ends? It would be arrogance and self-deprecation or self.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Those would be the.
I know everything and I don't know anything.
Right. Or like I
can't know anything.
Yeah, I can't know anything.
An over-assessment of my own understanding and abilities, or an under-assessment of them. Right.
Yeah.
What happens when we follow those two tracks? We probably end up in similar places. I would imagine is a sort of limited understanding or a limited dialogue.
Yes.
We were talking about the importance of dependence. Humility in essence will force us away from the idea that I myself have a hold on the truth. Forces me into dialogue with others. And that will then lead to the revealing of truth in ways that it wouldn't otherwise. And the same problem, I think, if you're undervaluing your own abilities, then you're neither pursuing the questions in the way that you need to be pursued in order to function as a human being. Seems to be able to expand in our intellectual realm. To grow. And this is something that is all children seem to do really well. And we somehow seem to forget that when we get out of school. That this seems to be a part of what it means to be human, is to continue to grow and to expand. And I don't necessarily mean in an imperialistic, colonialistic way. That's also a risk of expanding, right? Is that we expand in ways that aren't good and healthy. But that's a different discussion. But to continue to grow, Aristotle begins his philosophy in wonder.
Yeah, right. Philosophy, it begins in wonder.
And wonder is a crucial part of what it means to be human, to flourish and thrive as a human being, is to pursue the idea of wonder. And I think humility is a good way of doing that, because it pushes us into wonder, expansion of wonder with
and to look
one another.
For wonder. Humility makes you look for wonder, and that is the kind. Expansion and broadening it just seems very fitting terms now. But of course, a cancer also expands.
Yeah, right.
So it's not
expansion. Simpliciter is not good. Right?
Necessarily good or bad.
Growing, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on what's expanding.
What's expanding? Exactly. And what we want is sort of the points where we can. The points from which we can make connections, so that we can draw better and better interpretations and conclusions from things. So if we have more premises or more data that we can create premises of, we can make like a more solid logical conclusion of what or something like that.
And this is a love of truth, right?
Yeah.
This is like wanting to see, like, well, how does it work? Like, what's underlying it, or how does it best fit together? But I think wonder in a way is like a great word, because it combines the two, right? It's both humility and love for truth in one concept.
And that's once again, that's a phenomenon that seems. It's not as if I go out into the woods and I say, now I'm going to be struck with wonder. There's almost a passive sense of it. It's like a passion. It's something that happens to us. That we are struck by something. We've all had this experience where you're. It can be as stupid as you're walking down the street and you see the cobblestones set up in a certain way, and you stop for just a second and look down the street for 3 kilometers and think, this is incredible. Somebody had to come make these fantastic designs for 3 kilometers. Wow.
And
then, and that's not something that I go to the street thinking, oh, I'm going to be struck by the cobblestones today. It hits you.
So, but you can be open to it.
Yes.
That is the humility.
You can be open to be hit, to be struck by the passion of wonder.
This is what we talked about a little bit last time when we talked about an openness. Leisure as the basis of culture. This was the book that I brought up last time.
Yes.
Right. This openness to be. To be changed by a reality outside of you, right? And then this is what got me thinking about this topic.
Right.
Well, that and in connection to seeing really bad political debate, right? And I think that I guess that they go together, right? Because if you think of like, why is it that, what is it that's happening? What's the intellectual failure? Put it that way, right?
Yeah.
That sounds really harsh, but what's the intellectual failure or vice that leads to an inability to have dialogue?
Yeah.
And I think what it is it's a lack of these intellectual virtues, right? Humility and a pursuit of truth. Because if you don't have those in a dialogue, you're not dialoguing. You're just sloganing against each other, right? Like, and that's what we see so much today. So I feel like these are missing. These kind of intellectual virtues are missing, which makes it hard to pursue flourishing. And
right.
Yeah. Yes. And you said something about being open to be changed. By something. Right. And I was thinking about I'm like picking up somehow from dialogues like threads on Facebook, that there is a big fear of being changed, and maybe we should say. I mean, I'm just picking it up. I might be slightly. Slightly off the route, but what I'm picking up is the idea that if I like look at this link that you sent, I'm going to like lose myself, and then I'm going to fear that nothing will ever be the same. I'm not myself anymore. Yeah. But so this is what's so interesting about the self. And how you will be yourself. I want to just say that you will be yourself. And if you have guests in your house and they come in and they do something completely different, and then they leave, and it's not like you have become them in any way. You have just given them a charitable situation, and we can do this.
We can do this. Usually, we can do this.
Yeah,
you can be charitable to people.
Yeah, and the way that I will change is I will change on my path to. I will deal with the things on my path to Eudaimonia, to flourishing, but I won't become another self. Like, it is still the self. I'm like my personal philosophy here now. You can.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's a good.
But there seems to be. I mean, it's interesting because there seems to be inherent to humility. I mean, the what's standing in the way of humility is, I think what you're saying now is there's a sense of fear. And I mean, it is a risk.
Yes.
Humility is a risk. I mean, there's a sense in which there is a deconstruction of a certain kind of selfhood when you open yourself up beyond the categories that you've set up for who you are and what you believe. And that's dangerous. That's risky. And that's probably the fear of that is probably a big part of what prevents us from doing it. Not just that we're all arrogant, but maybe more that we're afraid.
Yeah. And we're afraid of being gullible.
Yeah.
You know, that is also the history. History has taught us, and this comes up so many times now with the Nazis and things. Whose side would you be on if you were in Germany? And then
it's easy in retrospect.
It is,
right? I mean, it's like obviously, but
sometimes it might just get. Saying no, like this. That is the easiest move that requires zero reflection or openness. You know, so.
And sometimes it requires a lot of courage, depending on the context.
Yes,
to say no.
After, when you have checked what's going on, and then of course. I mean, then there's like the divine rage or whatever. Of course, we have that aspect too, when you have to no in the name, and fight with the.
But think about Hannah Arendt's. How she So Hannah Arendt, the Jewish philosopher that looked at what's his name, the Nazi Eichmann, thank you, Eichmann.
Yeah, the trials.
The trials. That's right, Eichmann. So he was essentially a pencil pusher, right? He was an administrator who organized the timetables for the trains that took Jews to concentration camps. So he didn't say no. Right, and this was the big thing, right? This was how it all came down. Right? He was following orders, and he didn't say no. And the amazing thing about that is that he was key to the functioning of the entire program. And so, if he would have said no, it would have made a big difference. But he didn't, and you can, in a way, like what's so scary about it is you can see why he didn't. It was a good job,
right?
It was a good job, and he needed something to do, and he could do this well. And he didn't have to see anybody die. He never told anybody directly to kill anybody. He was just doing his head down, doing his work, ignoring what's going on, not thinking about it particularly, right?
Hence Arendt's The Banality of Evil. It's banal. He's sitting here in an office pushing pencils.
And nobody wants to do that.
The banality of the evil.
Yeah. And now everyone is really scared to be doing the same thing. And I wonder if they aren't doing that by not pursuing the truth. By not having this humility about their own standpoint. Even this, you know.
But this is important. Humility should never push us in a direction where it causes us to suspend judgment in moral issues where we ought to take a stance.
Yeah.
Because humility can also be twisted in a way that is not virtuous at all. To say, well, I can't make a judgment or I can't take a stance on that issue because I don't know enough or I need to research more. I mean, we have to come to a point where we have to be able to say, here I stand and no further.
So, but then you have to pursue
Luther.
the truth.
Right.
So that's why that's a great argument for that they're together, right?
Yeah.
They stand together. You can't. I mean, humility just on its own, in a way, could lead to these kinds of moral failures.
Inertia.
Right. Inertia. Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas the pursuit of truth is a thing
It's the force that pushes you forward. Forces
now,
forward.
not like after the holidays or but now I need to know what's going on.
Yeah, and this is but it's connected. It's really interesting, right? Because it's connected. Because even in saying, "Here I stand, and I can go no further," you're moving. Say that you're moving, but you can also say that in humility, right? Which is really different than a kind of ultimatum, which is like, "This is the only way it can be," and never questioning again, or never allowing for. Contextualization, you could say, or whatever, but
exactly. I mean, you mentioned Luther there, which is I made a kind of a side reference to Luther there, but I mean, in the Diet of Worms, I mean, that's the idea he had when he stood in front of this council is. If you're able to convince me with good argument and that they're based upon the scripture, then I will change my beliefs. But right now, my conscience does not allow me.
So, and it's a good combination there.
Right.
And it's a combination of humility and pursuit of truth. It's saying, as far as I can see, for everything that's in front of me, this is what I think is true.
And I will have to commit to this completely with the possibility and openness that I can then change. So it's a weird...
such a tough balance.
It's a strange thing to do. Total commitment, but yet openness to have that commitment be overturned.
To change,
we talked about this a little bit about the in facts, I think, with the doctors, and we said we don't want a doctor who is doing the same things as in 1960.
No,
but because when things change, you need to change.
You need to change.
You need to change.
And I guess the humility is the aspect that is the recognition that it can change.
It can change.
Right? And being willing to recognize where you're at. I mean, it's like saying, this is where I'm at, but I can listen and I can change, right? Like, it's
and if you get new directives from someone who wants you, if you're a doctor, and you notice that now I'm doing harm, which is the oath of medicine, of course, not to do harm, and then you have to again, so that would be the big no, Now I see that I am not one step more,
Right.
So,
that's fascinating. Once again, we're in the realm of the paradoxical here.
Bring it back to paradox, Guardian Scholar.
But of course, that's where all these talks end, is on the paradox. Because then you don't have to resolve anything. You can just go home happy and have both, or neither, and both at the same time. But my second question, I guess, had to do with this. Like, so
are we only on to the second question?
Oh, well, this is the second one I had. I mean, so how does this look? Practically, in the sense of how do we negotiate this dynamic of humility? I'm thinking of there's a couple positions that are a bit problematic. The first one, I mean, we touched upon here, and this is the sense of it takes a certain amount of knowledge or expertise to realize that one is not good at something, or that one wants to see one's own limitations. I mean, you remember the American Idol or Idol show. I mean, the worst singers are the ones who think that they're the best because they don't have the musical expertise to hear that they are themselves bad singers. So that's one problem here, is how do we get people out of that? The second problem is that when you begin to develop expertise, and you begin to see that there's so much that you don't know, and the more that you know, the more you realize you don't know. Sort of Socratic issue here. How do you not then fall into this sort of skepticism, or throw your hands up in the air and say, well, why pursue it then? Because the more I pursue, the deeper the hole gets.
So it's so good, because it kind of goes along with the sort of this one of these classical, I don't know what you call it, like a meme, I don't know, saying about people in university. So you've got so when you start out, you're a freshman, and you're a sophomore, junior, senior in the U.S. system. So when you're a freshman, you come in, right, and you wide-eyed, you say, oh, I don't know anything. When you're a sophomore, you think you got it figured out, right? When we say somebody's sophomoric, you mean there's kind of arrogance, I figured this university thing out, I got it. And by the time you're a junior, you're kind of sort of like, maybe not. And then by the time you finish, you're like, I have no idea. Right? So this is kind of like art, right? So in terms of like people, because you said in the beginning, like if people don't know enough about something, they think they know it really well. Then the crucial thing is a pursuit of truth.
Yeah.
And then as it goes on, they take on different roles, humility and a pursuit of truth.
Because it seems like humility develops as we develop expertise or knowledge in something. So there's a weird process there, right, that happens.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's also a little bit of a paradox there because in order to develop, you need to sense a sort of perceived lack of something.
Right.
And if you don't perceive that lack of something, you're not going to pursue the development that's required to get out of that. But then once you begin to pursue that, you realize that it falls out on the other end, right?
Yeah.
So how does Socrates do this?
Five-year-olds have no sense of their limits, right? They think they're good at everything,
right?
But they're fascinated by new things. So that there's like this drive, this internal drive to figure things out, right? Like they love just figuring things out, even though they think they've got it. You know, I'm basically good at everything. Like, I can do it all, right?
They're overcome by wonder.
Overcome by wonder. They are, without sort of self-reflecting on it.
I have another thing.
Yeah?
Yes. And another thing they are overwhelmed or overcome by is this participation in the world.
Yeah, sure.
And that's what I wanted to come to. With the singer who can't hear that. He really can't sing because there is some kind of discrepancy between how you use the senses and how they sort of boomerang back at you. Like the relation with the self, which is completely closed, and then the world, which is like outside. And I think this is one of my favorite paradoxes about how we are as selves. Both completely separate and completely united. The completely one and completely separate. And this is the how we need to overcome this by, for instance, participation in the world. And so if you a 5-year-old maybe has the idea that it can be done, therefore I possibly can do it. You know.
Yes.
So you put yourself in this possibility position.
Yeah.
And more people should do that.
Yeah,
and,
right.
I saw.
So not quite like a 5-year-old, right?
Not quite, but
in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah,
it should be more childlike, oftentimes. In terms of sense of humility, in sense of like a wonder of.
Yeah, and the wonder and curiosity and seeing like, oh, they can do it. I'm like, I don't drive a car as you know, and I've tried several times, and once I like started crying. I'm like, I'm never going to learn this. It's too difficult. You have to look in like every direction. It's so easy for you.
You don't have to, but I mean,
it helps to not crash. Right?
But you know, it's just I should have done it so long ago, and I didn't, and now it feels really. But then I'm thinking, I mean, you know, all these idiots can drive. Of course,
especially these two right here.
But you know, and like 16-year-olds can drive. Of course, I can learn how to drive. But that's not what I wanted to say. But so last night I happened to watch TV something from England, and it was about a bunch of people who never go out running. You're gonna love this. And they were going to go out running.
Nice.
And they were people with I didn't quite get the beginning of the show, but at least one was very depressed.
Okay.
So there was a clip where he was saying, no, I'm not going out running today, and he was sitting in this chair, and you could see that he had been sitting there for some days. You know? And he said, and he was talking about what it was like to be depressed, and he said, and suddenly I'm going here, and I'm thinking, what's the point anyway? And it's such a waste of time to think like this. And you could see how he was. And then he just said, "Can we turn it off? I don't want to talk about it." So it was like a horrible, so depressed in the that sense of the word, like compressed, depressed, and down. And I was thinking, with the pursuit of truth, you can even in this situation, you can ask, who is prepared to give up? Like, what is this self that is prepared to give up? So then you have the boomerang idea again, from the self to the self, looking at my processes. So you can even take an interest in you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So again, back to the self. You know, I love the self.
You're into the self right now.
I'm into the self. Yeah.
Have you read Kierkegaard's pseudonymous Sickness Unto Death?
No?
No, the first paragraph is all about, it's a description of the self. The self as the relation that relates to itself by relating to another. There's all these multiple relationships, and it's exactly sort of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
it would really work
side
well
note
for
there.
if you're depressed. You should read some Kierkegaard maybe.
Yeah,
Hey,
it might make it worse, but
Yeah, and go out running.
Go
Yeah.
running.
Yeah, use your senses again.
Mhm,
Like your, yeah.
Should we try to tie it off?
Yeah.
Because we can always keep going.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can start.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm just thinking here, chewing over this, like the last sort of conundrum I was left with here, and it seems that Socrates is a great person to look to in this case as guidance here, because he was able to get out of this state of the lack of self-perception. He could begin this process, but he didn't. Neither did he fall into this sort of nihilism of giving up. And I wonder if there's a methodology built into the pursuit that he had that in some sense created a trajectory that he wasn't able to see necessarily where it was going, but he could see a certain direction.
Sure.
So it wasn't a falling into nihilism because there was a directionality to the pursuit,
Good.
which I think is dependent on a pretty robust account of truth. For Plato, for Socrates, and I think that's another discussion for another time. But I'm curious to see about how humility, how the love of truth is in fact connected to a really strong account of truth.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a
good.
way in which we can work through that to see how that dynamic works. That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
I'll leave that there though for another time.
Yes, right. So I will say, can't believe I didn't think about this earlier, but can you have a love of truth without humility?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens then? Why is it
Good question.
worse?
Yeah.
Yeah, what happens with it? The love of truth, if you don't have humility.
Can I kind of answer that maybe?
Yeah.
I think because what happens because this kind of ties into a conversation that Matthew and I had just yesterday. I think I think it ties into you will, by only having a love of truth and a lack of humility, you'll end up missing the mark. Right? Because you won't allow the valuable perspective of others to shape yours, right? Because so you'll become isolated in your own version of the truth, but you'll miss the truth. So I think that's where they fall, where it falls.
Your trajectory will be misaimed and it'll go off in a different direction.
And that's very broad, right? Like listening to others. I mean, that could be seen in many different ways. I mean, like reading books and like following other people's arguments. I mean, it can be in many different ways. But I think just a love for truth without humility ends up being isolating and therefore skewed because you're stuck in your own.
Right.
Yeah, and you also, I love the way you said miss the mark, because you miss the important truth, and it's like in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's this guy who has the truth about everything. So he's lying in bed, he's completely exhausted for telling the truth about everything all the time. So people come in and he's like, those pants don't really go with your shirt, 11 plus 11 is 22, and like saying everything that's true, and he dies in the next minute because it's just
too much.
And it's too much, and it has no meaning.
Sure, it's not connected to.
So the humility will have the intention for your search for truth or something like that.
Right.
It's good.
So much more to say there. I want to jump on that, but I won't.
Save it for next time. We can't go much over an hour. So, our viewers will never come back. So I think it was really good. I mean, I feel like there is definitely this connection between humility and a love of truth, and we didn't get to talking too much about particular how possible questions, but that they're on the edge there. Like, how is it possible to have meaning would be one. Like, how is it possible to know about the external world, which we kind of got into a kind of truth, right? So there are a lot of these. I find these how possible questions so fascinating. Partly because of like my slightly Kantian background, right? Like, how is synthetic a priori truth possible, which is Kant's question in the Critique of Pure Reason. So I mean, like, these kind of questions are so fascinating because.
But you can also make it very much more tangible than today. Like, how is it possible that this politician is saying when the facts seem to point at if you want to?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah. So I was just, but I think there's just a lot of lot of potential there in looking at how those intellectual virtues hang together.
Mm.
I just like the idea of intellectual virtues as a whole. It's
Yeah, I also like intellectual virtues. I like virtues.
Yeah,
Virtues.
it's
I think virtues is great. Thinking about virtues and which are my important virtues. You know, it's a wonderful pastime. Really.
And not only thinking about them, but practicing them.
Yeah,
right?
of course. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Philosophical practice.
Well, everybody, I think there's so much more we can say, and
we will.
that's probably, and we will. And I think that's probably a good place to put a little period here for this discussion. But thank you so much for joining us here in this forum. We're all together, and we will be back on Skype, I'm sure, in the future.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us for this conversation. We look forward to seeing you with us again in the coming days and weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.